Well, again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. For those of you that are not lucky enough to have met me, my name is Supriya. I am the community manager here at GreyNoise. And yeah, this is our second ever open forum. And if the webinar invitation didn't give it away, we're going to talk about RIOT today. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about GreyNoise. So plan is we're going to go over kind of who's here, the whole team. We're going to talk about RIOT. And then most importantly, I think we're going to answer all of your questions. So that sounds good to folks. We can talk a little bit about the team. If this is deja vu and you joined us for our first ever open forum, we have doubled in size since April. It's actually pretty crazy. It's just been insane growth over the last few months. We've added quite a few new team members, including Austin, who started on Monday. So everyone give a very warm welcome to her. But yeah, growing really big, lots of people joining in different departments, and yeah, onwards and upwards from here. I'd like to take a minute though, before we get into the nitty gritty, to talk a little bit about the community. So different places, maybe you are seeing this or hearing this a lot. I certainly am. I think it's one of those things where when you're in it or you do it, you see it everywhere. Community means a lot of things to different organizations, but specifically at GreyNoise, community means that we are indebted to our users, both free and paid, whether that's a free user or a customer. And the idea is that we want to gather all of your feedback, treat you the way that we would treat any other type of customer and or rather shareholder, right? I think is the word that Andrew likes to use. And gather your feedback, be able to deliver features and products based on things that you users need or want, and yeah, continue to bring you along in this lovely journey we're on. So as always, you can join us on Slack. We have a pretty exciting Slack community, if I do say so myself. And you can also take time to chat with us. I do one-on-one demos if this is your first exposure to GreyNoise and you'd like to get more familiar. Or if you're a seasoned user and you want to tell me how you're using our product, we also host How I Use GreyNoise sessions, where we like to spotlight members of our community doing cool and interesting things. So you can reach out to me, community@greynoise.io. You can DM me on Twitter too. A lot of people seem to do that, and I'm totally fine with that. So lots of ways to reach me. But without further ado, I think we're just going to get into it. So Greg, would you like to educate us a little bit on the background about GreyNoise?
Sure, let's do that. So before we can talk about RIOT and the RIOT origin story, let's go through the old use cases everyone knows so well. So, and I'm going to just quickly, as fast as possible, describe GreyNoise. Andrew will go into this in more detail after this, but again, GreyNoise, we have a global network of sensors. We're collecting what we call internet background noise from around the world. It's just noise that should not be hitting anybody, or should not be hitting, or is hitting everyone. Talking to these sensors that don't provide any business value whatsoever. So we take that noise, and why is that useful? It's for the analysts to use that to separate the signal, basically IPs targeting their networks, from this internet background noise. And they do that by enriching through their SIM or SOAR or threat intelligence platforms. And that's really that use case number one, our core use case of increasing analyst efficiency, getting rid of that noise. As a byproduct of collecting all that data, we also see compromised devices. You can think SSH worms, botnets, devices that have been popped and are now scanning their net for other vulnerable devices or services. And we also have emerging threats, which is a lot of effort we're putting into tracking vulnerabilities and CVEs as they come out, modifying that sensor network to capture that activity, and really just exposing as soon as we see that emerge in the wild to our users. But back to that core use case, increasing analyst efficiency. So we ask ourselves, how else can we provide insight into noise? What other sources of noise can we identify and provide context to our users, saving them time? What else can we roll out? And that's where we came up with RIOT. So really, this is specifically traffic leaving your network that are usually outbound connections to common business services. You can think of your employees or devices on your network talking to Slack or Office 365 or Zoom or Atlassian or CDNs, and having to identify what those IPs are is not the best use of your time. So that's why we pulled together what we call RIOT as a curated list of those IPs against those common business services. And we try to keep that as curated and accurate as possible, updating that every few hours and providing that as an IP lookup service to our users. So providing both the noise and the RIOT. And next slide. All right. And that is basically where we're going to hand off. I'm going to hand this off to Andrew for this piece to go over those two different sets of data.
So thanks, Greg. So basically the long and the short here is that there are tons of different kinds of data that you shouldn't care about. And you can't not care about it if you don't know what it is or don't have any kind of data-driven way of separating what is noise and what isn't. And noise means different things to different organizations, but we at GreyNoise have identified two pretty rock solid kinds of noise that if an analyst wants to ignore it, they should be able to, and be able to kind of like whittle it down, spend more time looking at the things that really matter to them and their organization, and kind of like wasting as little time as humanly possible. So the two kinds of noise that we're going to talk about here today is like what we call like actual internet background noise, right? So this is people that are scanning and crawling the internet that are as Greg was saying, like just honestly creating a ton of distractions for people that are on the internet or for people who are looking at a network perimeter. The problem is that if you don't know what's hitting everyone, you have no real way of knowing what's hitting you specifically. And you have to be able to whittle that stuff out to be able to figure out the attacks that really matter to your organization. The way that this works, like Greg mentioned, is we have a giant network of passive collector sensors. You can think of them kind of like honeypots in thousands of places around the globe, in dozens of countries around the world. And they sit back, they have no business value whatsoever. So they see the only traffic that they see are the things that are pretty much hitting everyone on the entire internet. They effectively stream all of the telemetry that is kind of like rolling through they stream all of the telemetry that is hitting them to a central place where Nate and his team are actually applying analytics onto that data and basically tagging it for a host of different purposes. And then RIOT is actually the data that we're going to talk about mostly today. RIOT is effectively, instead of us trying to identify like the standard normal amount of, distracting, telemetry that's hitting your perimeter from the outside, it's actually the exact opposite. It's actually the stuff that is totally normal that's going to be leaving your network or egressing from your network, right? And so this is going to be those regular business services that your users are going to be using. These are IP addresses and domains that are specifically IP addresses, what we're going to talk about today, that are your network is almost certainly talking to, and that's not a bad thing. So the examples are being, like Greg mentioned, Office 365, different Google products, CDNs, update servers, public DNS servers, things like that. Those IP addresses are going to show up in tons and tons of network security products, and they're going to make up quite a bit of traffic. So one of the first things that security people often do when they're hunting for badness is you have to get rid of the normal. You have to get rid of the stuff that is normal for your network to be talking to, so you can find the more interesting things. And so our RIOT list is up to about 70 million unique IP addresses that we're collecting every day. And we're really excited about it because it actually can really, really help like cut down the amount of noise and wasted time that you're seeing on your network as you're investigating stuff. Spria, can you pop it over? Yeah, so let's see. So this is at a high level, this is basically like a diagram of how GreyNoise works. So we have outbound noise, which is RIOT. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we have inbound noise. So inbound noise, think of that as like, this is the stuff that's hitting your perimeter, your network's perimeter. This is the stuff that's made up by people who are scanning the internet, crawling the internet. And it's some combination of good guys, security companies, bad guys, security researchers, universities, and tons of different companies and organizations like that. They're scanning the internet all the time. We've got at least one person on this open forum right now that's probably scanned the internet or is probably scanning the internet right now. So all of those different people create this kind of sort of low level background noise that's happening on people's networks all the time. And at scale, it's actually quite a bit of noise, and it can be really distracting to security analysts. And then on the outbound side, you can see architecturally here, you've got traffic that's leaving the organization that is going to include traffic to Google, traffic to Cloudflare, Zscaler, Microsoft, any of those other products that you're using. And it's completely normal for you to be talking to those hosts, but without knowing kind of like the list of what they are, it's really difficult or unwieldy to look at your data minus those things, which is probably where the more interesting threats are going to show up, right? And so that's basically that's basically kind of the paradigm that that we're operating under. And this diagram is really just to give you guys a little bit more understanding of kind of exactly architecturally how these different offerings work and how Riot actually fits into it. Next slide. So Riot, as we were talking about right now, this is us effectively interrogating and enumerating the IP address space of all of the CDNs that we can find on the internet. So that's going to be your Akamai's, your Cloudflares, your Azure CDNs, your Google CDNs, et cetera. All of the different CDNs that we can find that are just content delivery networks, right? These are normal, the IP addresses of these things are, they're of which A, they make up just a massive amount of the internet, but B, it's also going to be really, really normal for your network to be talking to them if you have anybody who's browsing the internet. Update servers, this is going to be like, your Microsoft update servers, some of the different Linux update servers, et cetera. Public DNS and NTP services, SaaS APIs, so different, the different APIs that your products or that a lot of the devices in your network are supposed to be talking to, and that are programmed to be talking to, and then different, cloud security products, et cetera. What Riot isn't like a big blank, safe list, allow list, or anything like that. And the reason for that, and from the perspective of a network security product, the reason for that is that effectively there are ways that an advanced enough attacker can actually abuse your network using these services that doesn't actually remove from the core functionality of what Riot is. It serves as a time saver to help you very quickly identify these things and not accidentally block something that is effectively going to cause you to, it's going to cause problems on your network. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to end up just having to unblock it anyway. So basically, like, the way that you don't want to think about Riot is like, oh, this is a list of IP addresses that if my network is talking to them, it's bad. That's definitely absolutely not the case. But you also don't want to think about it like, oh, so I should only allow my network to talk to these things, because then you're probably going to break the internet as well. This stuff is hairy and hard and complicated, and everyone's different. Everyone's networks and security postures and kind of threat models are a little bit different, but without knowing these things, you can't possibly make decisions in the SOC without them and without this information. And it's just otherwise a waste of time to eventually, to be looking at some telemetry, analyzing it, investigating it, triaging it for 30 minutes, only to find out like, oh man, this is an IP address that belongs to, a stack path CDN, right? Like I just wasted 30 minutes. Like, now I'm going to have to do something completely different. I'm going to move on to something else. I can close this out, et cetera. So this is kind of the way that we recommend that you think about Riot a little bit. And with that, Nate, I would like for you to talk about trust levels.
Okay, great. Yeah, so inside of Riot, we initially put in like a lot of these IPs when we were trying out and developing the product. And we realized that it doesn't necessarily make sense for all of them to have the same trust level. For example, like CDNs are something that is necessary for your business, right? Like if you block all CDNs, that's going to be real bad for your business, and your employees are going to be real mad because a large portion of the internet is just going to be unavailable to them. But also CDNs have very poor, what I like to call end user attribution. Meaning they have high business necessity, poor end user attribution, meaning what comes from or what is hosted behind a CDN is not necessarily attributable. What Riot tries to do is identify services where that are trustworthy and also attributable, like for example, Microsoft, right? If Microsoft has a compromise or Google has a compromise, right, and your users are browsing towards Google infrastructure, there's really like not much anyone could have done about that except for Google or Microsoft, right? That's just something that we accept like in the ecosystem where it's like kind of like just not your fault, not your problem. So when we built out Riot, we split things into 2 trust levels, and then also things we would kind of never add to Riot, even though we know like where that infrastructure is. And this allows you to basically stratify and tier out, different IPs that can be effectively ruled out in one way or another. One way is effectively like trust levels. Trust level 1, which is, yeah, this is just very trustworthy. The users definitely need this. Can't really do anything about it. And trust level 2, where this is something that we definitely need. We can't just block wholesale because it could be problematic. But at the same time, there is some risk potentially associated with that, meaning it's not like something that you completely ignore, but it's also something where it's like, you can't just walk away from it. So next slide, please, Supriya. So the way we kind of flesh this out was we did a bit of analysis and we kind of like did a bit of a scoring where you can see here the top of the triangle or the top of this spider chart is owner attribution. That is like how is this IP like clearly owned by this organization or this particular service, right? In this case, you see like Datadog, Zscaler, Google DNS, even Tor, right? Like it's easy to know if an IP belongs to this organization. On the bottom left, that's like the business necessity. Like how crucial is this to your users? Like if it was blocked, would your users be able to not do, or be unable to do their jobs? And on the bottom right, we have end user attribution, which is how much do we like how associated is the organization such as like Datadog or LogMeIn or Gmail with the actual content that comes from that IP. So in the case of like Zscaler or Dropbox or that kind of stuff, these things are kind of like business necessary. Users will interface with them often. However, malicious files can be hosted on those. So those have become, Supriya, next slide. Those have become level 2 and level 1 respectively, right? So for example, you see the ones where there's high business necessity, high owner attribution, high end user attribution, meaning like, okay, you know, Google DNS, we know it's coming from Google. Google owns it. Google has responsibility for this, and a lot of people use it. That's a trust level 1. For something like JS Deliver, it's kind of an arbitrary CDN. We know JS Deliver owns these IPs. We know a lot of people use them, so they're kind of business necessary. If you block them, things might act funky. But really, like I can't fully trust like the content that is coming out of it because it's a CDN. So that's trust level 2. However, again, I can't block it because it'll cause things to go poorly. Supriya, next slide. Finally, here's like kind of a bit of a more nuanced breakdown on one particular service. For example, Google, like Google's actual infrastructure, we put that as trust level 1. So that's when you're interfacing again with like Google DNS. However, for something like Google CDN, we have this issue where anyone can be kind of behind that. So they could be serving malicious content. But again, like since it's so dynamic, your users will have to interface with it. And then finally, there is Google Compute. How do we handle Google Cloud Compute IPs, which are kind of arbitrary? Well, some people host their infrastructure behind static IPs inside Google Cloud Compute, and they publish those. And so when they do publish those, we might add those as a separate trust level 1. Say like GreyNoise was hosted inside of, you know, maybe our main web page was hosted inside Google Cloud for some reason, and your analysts are browsing to it, right? That would be something where it's like, okay, that's trust level 1, even though it's inside Google Cloud, where normally that would not be trust level 1, or even trust level 2. It wouldn't even be in RIOT at all because it's arbitrary compute. So happy to answer any further questions about that later on. For now, I turn it to Brad, I believe, right?
Yep, that would be me. All right. So of course, you've heard all this wonderful information about what RIOT is. Now the question is, how the heck do I access the data, and how do I actually make the determinations of what to do? So a couple of pretty simple ways we try to make sure that you can access this the same way you access all of our other data. And so the short and simple answer is, let's start by putting those IP addresses into the viz, just like you would for any other ones. This is a sample of a trust level 1 page that you would get from the visualizer. So you're going to see that this is one that you can reasonably ignore based on all the information that Nate just went through and how we make that determination. And then Supriya, if you can go to the next slide, please. And then here is an example of what a trust level 2 looks like as well. So again, we're showing you or calling out the fact that, you know, you want to go ahead and have a moment of a pause here as you sort of take a look at this. And, you know, this is a CDN, so something you want to look into a little bit more as you go through. And of course, you know, we try to ensure that all of our data is available, you know, through our APIs and through our integrations as well. So Supriya, if you can go to the next slide, please. We do have a subset of what is available for RIOT available in our free community API. All right, so you can simply go ahead and just curl, you know, any IP address against the community API, and you'll get that Boolean there that tells you that this IP address is in fact in RIOT. And so you'll sort of get that all here. And then we also have it in our enterprise API. So Supriya, if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so for those with paid subscriptions, you'll be able to hit our dedicated RIOT API and get the full context of all the details on a RIOT API as well. This is everything that you would see in the visualizer page with our explanation and the trust level information and categories, and just a more expanded than what you would get out of the community API. And then for all of those that love integrations, here's just a couple of samples. We do try to make sure that Riot isn't available in as many integrations as we can offer. So a couple samples that we're just showing here is just a screenshot from Anomaly and from our newly released Multigo Enterprise integration. And so we try to expand these out and make sure that these are available for you. And you'll see these in all of our major enterprise. So for those out there using things like Splunk or Phantom or XOR, Swimlane, Tines, any of those platforms, they all have these Riot lookups built in, and so that you can go ahead and take advantage of this data in all those integrations and automation platforms as well. And then I'm going to now hand it off to Greg, I believe.
Yep, thanks. So you've heard some of our sources already. We have about 64 different sources we use, a total about 45 million IPs at this time. Again, we're constantly curating that list, adding new sources or cutting back ones that really don't fit or aren't performing how we expected. We have some examples here of some of our sources. We are trying to get as creative as possible with what would be a source of Riot. So we're always adding to this list. And as you can imagine, I'm guessing a lot of you also have some great ideas of what should be on Riot. Spirit, next slide, please. We'll go through some of what's coming up for next within Riot, and one of those is adding additional Riot sources and reaching out to the community, both asking for requests and eventually allowing our community to provide submissions straight to Riot, either via API or some other mechanism for that, and just continuing to build out this list of potentially benign or at least common business services. Some other steps for us from a product perspective, we want to support a higher volume of IP lookups. Riot is becoming a lot more popular than we expected at first, which is fantastic. We love that. That means we need to continue to scale up our infrastructure to support potentially millions and millions of IP lookups per day against Riot. So that's something we're focusing on right now. We also need to make sure that Riot's integrated tightly within our APIs. So as Brad mentioned, we have it integrated within the community API, but for the enterprise side of the house, it's a separate API endpoint right now. We want to merge it in with the rest of the APIs for that and just continue to build in additional pieces of Riot throughout the product, both on the API side and the visualizer. So right now with the visualizer, we have Riot built into it as Brad showed off. So just continuing that development on the product side, and potentially expansion of trust levels, as Nate covered. As we identify certain sources, maybe they're not as trustworthy as we want. Maybe we go to a trust level 3 or 4, where it's something that's you probably need to look at a bit more, but is again a business service that if you blocked it, you're probably going to cause problems throughout the organization. And that's next slide. I think that's it. Yep.
Yeah, and so I would actually ask, before we even open it up to questions, I want to ask a question of the audience right now, which is effectively what are some of the other things that you could think of that you didn't see in here that we haven't had listed that you would like to, as an analyst or as a security person, that you find yourself often basically saying oh, wait, I think I might have something here, only to find out, 5 minutes later, oh, actually, this is something that I don't care about. We want to know what those things are. So if you are, if you aren't multitasking and you aren't doing something else right now, and if you do match the criteria of kind of what I'm describing, we'd love it if you popped it in the chat, if you shot us a note or anything like that, because I actually really want to hear some more ideas about the kinds of sources that we could look at. So just from my perspective, that's my question to ask of you guys. Over here over the next few minutes. Oh yeah, I'm actually already seeing some. This is great. But with that, yeah, sorry, Supriya, I saw you'd unmuted.
Yes. With that, obviously we'd like to open it up for questions. I know that there are a few in the Q&A, but yeah, this is our opportunity to answer. So I think it'd be valuable to answer this verbally. Greg is asking, do you have known sinkholes in the data?
Greg's right here. No, I'm just kidding.
Different Greg.
All right, I'm kidding. So we don't have known sinkholes in the data. I think that's actually a really great idea. We've found known sinkholes before a number of times, throughout the research that we've done. but we don't have that included in Riot data right now. And honestly, I think that's a really good idea. I know that I'd found an Anubis one a long time ago, and I know that there's like that's kind of one of those things that I know can like take up space in in a security analyst brain. But I think that's a great idea for what it's worth. The last thing that I wanted to say is if you guys want to kick the tires on Riot, literally right now, you can just grab a file of a bunch of IP addresses and a bunch of if you have logs, whether they're like network logs or anything like that, and you already have a GreyNoise account, just log in with your GreyNoise account and submit that file to our analysis page. It'll enrich every single IP address that you have against our noise data and against our Riot data. So you can check out GreyNoise, the Riot feature that we're talking about. It's live right now. You guys can check it out if you want to give it a shot. If you're a GreyNoise customer, you've got access to this right now. You can go ahead and start using these APIs, and like you've already got it. If you aren't a GreyNoise customer and you want to kick the tires before you have any kind of conversation with us, then check out the community API or just create a free account. Throw everything against the analysis page. It's right there. But with that, sorry, I do want to answer more questions.
Awesome. The next question is, if a customer has a large fleet of systems making GreyNoise API requests, do you recommend a local cache to avoid redundant requests?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So Brad's done some incredible work on our API and on our SDK effectively in Python. Our Python one is the most mature, and it's the one that we really support internally. There are some other like, I don't want to call them aftermarket because that sounds like kind of demeaning, but there are some like community SDKs that other people have built that we just don't technically support. I know that someone has a Ruby one. I've seen Go ones before. But yeah, so the answer is like you're probably going to want to cache it because it's going to be a high volume of requests. Brad's already built this out in the Python SDK. So we have native caching in our Python SDK. You don't even have to change anything. You do one lookup, it's going to be whatever, like however many 100 milliseconds, but then you do another lookup on that same IP address again, and it's going to be like a fraction of a millisecond because it's just retrieving it from memory. Great question, though.
So we actually have a request to live demo the analysis page.
Oh, yeah.
So Andrew, would you like to steer?
Whew. All right, let me make sure there is nothing weird going on my screen right now. Let's see.
For the audience, I think I just asked him his favorite question.
Let's see. All right, I'm going to, I need a file of some kind. So let me see, where would I get, I don't want to pick on anyone and do like a threat feed. So you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to just do like a net stat from my machine. And I'm going to throw this against Riot. So let's see, right now, I'm going to, why don't I just do like a net stat from my computer and grab all of the IP addresses that my computer's talking to. So yeah, this should work. So I think this is a faster version. Yeah. And so then I can rack and stack these real quick. So this is just me running a netstat on my laptop and then sorting it, doing a little bit of bash kung fu. All right. So these are all of the IP addresses that my laptop's talking to right now. I'm going to grab these, pipe it straight into my keyboard, into my clipboard. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to go over to the analysis page, and I'm going to dump all of these in here, blow this up a little bit, and I'm going to hit the analyze button so we can see here. That was fast. Okay, so we basically have here, if I go over here to the Riot data, we effectively have, like, we can see here that of the connections that my laptop is talking to right now, look, there's a lot of kind of like non-routable IPs in here and stuff. So like I wasn't really planning on doing this, but we've got, of the 55 IP addresses that we found, probably a lot of the ones that are unidentified that we don't know anything about are going to be non-routable. Maybe we eliminated those. I don't know. But then if I go over here and I look at the Riot data, we can see that 34% of them are, or rather 30 of these IP addresses are in Riot right now. And we can see exactly how. My laptop's talking to Amazon CloudFront, Apple, Cloudflare, Google, GitHub, et cetera. And so these are some of the ones that we're looking at right now. If you guys have any log files or anything like that that you can tell me where I could find, or any like IP address, any kind of like files on the internet that you'd be interested in knowing about, what they would show up as in the analysis page, let me know and I'll demo that as well. Let's see. I could. I'm going to go over to Abuse IPDB, and I'm actually just going to grab just the list of IP addresses that people are reporting. This isn't IP addresses that they're saying are bad per se, so I'm not picking on them. I'm like a huge fan of use IPDB. I'm going to just grab all of these, and I'm going to go back over here. I'm not sure that any of these are going to be in Riot, to be completely honest. So I'll run this right now, and then we'll just see how it returns. It's possible that there's going to be some Riot IPs in there, and it's possible that there aren't any. We got 6 IP addresses in Riot here on this from that. We've got a Cloudflare CDN IP, a Facebook IP, 2 Office 365 IPs, a Cloudflare CDN IP, and a Google IP. So we found 6 IPs in here in this list of random unstructured data that I just found of people that had reported IPs to Abuse IPDB, and we found that at least 6 of these are things that you more than likely aren't going to have to worry about. So thank you for whoever asked that question. You totally put me on the spot. But I refuse to totally bend to the will of the demo gods. So I'm glad that it worked out reasonably well.
I think that was great. We have somehow exhausted all of our questions, which is highly unusual for this bunch. So, I mean, we can sit and hang out for the next 30 minutes and take this more informal and take it offline. But I'll leave it open for another minute.
I'm going to roll through. So you guys can ask any questions that you want about Riot. You can ask any questions that you want about GreyNoise or anything broadly or abstractly. So if you guys do have any other questions, then would really be interested in hearing what some of those are. I'm looking at some of the comments that are coming in here. Let's see. Yeah, which other CDNs? Brad, let's see. Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple of people are recommending Qualys, Rapid7, Nessus, Security Scorecard, BitSite, Risk Recon. Yep. So we've got tags for most of those already right now. So you can actually use GreyNoise to figure out, the IP addresses that those services are delivering their service from. You can do that right now. Ryan, you've got your hand up. What's up?
Yes, sir. My comment was, or a question is, with the Riot, would it be appropriate to have at least DigitalOcean and OVH in this, almost level 2 or level 3 not trusting? Because from my experience, their inbound is terrible, and that's already in the normal GreyNoise data set. But then I'm also worried on outbound traffic to DigitalOcean and OVH. Just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so that's a great question. The issue with us putting Riot in cloud, or at least for our thinking, because at the end of the day, what we want to provide is something that solves problems for our users. So I'll tell you the way that we think about it, and then you can tell me if we're in the right or in the wrong. But at the end of the day, if an IP address, or if one of the members of a group of IP address can be used to attack you pretty easily, launch attacks against you, e.g., there's arbitrary compute, a person can log into a box and do whatever they want from it at your network, we're probably not going to put it into Riot, just because specifically, we don't want to tell you oh, don't worry about this thing by and large, if it's pretty easy actually for someone to use it or for someone to attack you from it. And I would say, more than anything, if you block a DigitalOcean IP address, it doesn't necessarily cause problems in your network, one atomic IP address. That isn't necessarily something that you would get in trouble for. Whereas we're really trying to prevent our analysts from kind of having any kind of blocking anything that's going to disrupt the network or anything like that. Nate, what do you want to add? Oh, Nate, you're muted.
Yeah, so on one of those slides, you noted that we kind of had trust level 1, trust level 2 for Google. We broke it down with also the cloud compute in there. I think a lot of people have asked us will you just label all my IPs for that? I think that's something that we're interested in doing. We're just trying to figure out how to do it in a way where it doesn't get conflated with the traditional rule it out model, right? So for example, in your case, you're kind of asking for DO. There are legitimate businesses that run out of DO, right? They might even be trust level 1 because they're hosting it. They've been on those nodes for a really long time. They're just very small businesses and they host 1 or 2 IPs there. We'd have to have something like trust level 3, but that becomes a little bit complicated. But it's definitely something we are thinking about and trying to figure out how to provide that to you as a customer, is the context for every single IP, so that you kind of have a one-stop shop. Is that kind of I hope that answers your question, kind of gets at what you're thinking about. That this is something we want to do if it's useful to to you or analysts or something like that to just get that context. But rule it out or riot is effectively for kind of has like more trust and more business necessity in that particular data set.
Right, and I was just thinking through that same context ball there, meaning that, hey, if my users are going to these big brands, Google, Cloudflare, et cetera, and just like what was pointed out previously, bad actors can abuse those sites. So I just thought from the volume of a provider, which OVH and NDO is pretty big, I just thought that might be useful to say, hey, there's these other users that are going to these destinations, and I know that the trust level is kind of tricky, but I just thought that might be worth at least labeling. That's all.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a great point. Thank
Thanks
you,
for asking
Ryan.
that question, Ryan. Yeah.
So we have a couple more questions. Jerry, I'm going to ask your question first, and then I'll go to this next one, actually. So Jerry's asking, I'm curious if people are using Riot to truly rule it out, like escalating stuff that is not on Riot versus actually using it to color things bad or block things, raise incidents, etc. In his case, Riot means kill it with fire. It's not mission critical.
So my ability to talk intelligently about this is somewhat limited because Riot has only been, like, we've only had people using it for a few months, like in production at high volume. So Jerry, my experience right now is that no one is necessarily escalating connections out of the organization that are not in Riot, because that would just be like a massive volume of stuff. That would just be basically, you know, all of the different things that people are browsing to that we can't enumeratably prove as safe, like in a programmatic way with the same kind of method that we're using with Riot. What we're finding is that a lot of people are using Riot as sort of a filter once they think it's doing something bad, or if they're trying to execute a hunt on a bunch of telemetry to basically like whittle stuff down to kind of prioritize. Like if you think about it more of like a funnel, so there's kind of like the two fundamental ways that I would think about it is, and what I've seen in practice is I have an alert for something. Before I do anything with it, I'm going to enrich it against Riot just so that it kind of like gives me information about this thing before I make a decision or raise it to an analyst. But B, as a threat hunter, I have like all of these different places where bad might be happening. And I want to try to whittle it down to the places, to a smaller list of things that are more likely that bad is happening. Does that make sense, Jerry? Did I hopefully I answered your question on that. Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you, Jerry.
Awesome. It looks like we have a couple more questions, but I did want to give Brad an opportunity to talk about or kind of answer that question. There's also one asking about the percentage of traffic customers or prospects are seeing as Riot, even just anecdotally.
Oh, like a massive amount. Brad, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on specifically the use case and which data they're enriching. I mean, but we've seen as high as 85% of the IP addresses being looked up in Riot having hits. You know, of course, that doesn't apply to everybody. And you know, if you're looking at inbound traffic versus outbound traffic, that can make a huge difference. So I would say a more common average is probably in the 30 to 40% range. And, you know, that sort of goes up and down as you tie in our noise data set as well. But yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing a pretty high hit rate, pretty consistently across the board. And a lot of people are being able to do a lot of different things with that data and filter that noise out.
Yeah.
This is great. We have we've had quite a few questions, so I'm going to take the opportunity to step in. We've had a few questions about our pricing. So Open Forum typically is strictly community, right? I'll be pretty strict about that. That being said, if you have asked for it, I can send you the link to our pricing page. And I strongly encourage you to talk to one of our sales representatives, some of who are on the call today. Or you can reach out to me if you're much much more early in the stages. But Andrew, you look like you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, we're desperately trying to not shill our products on the open forum. We're really trying to like stick to stuff that you can do something with for free. We want to keep this as like a sacred place where we don't want to like push products in your face. I can talk about pricing at a very high level right now in a way that's relevant without necessarily shilling any of our products. So
I'll time you.
So I'll do this in like 2 seconds. It's going to take me 2 seconds. We've changed our pricing model recently from basically, we used to think about everything from a volume perspective, like volume of queries, however many queries. You want to do a few queries, we're going to charge you a few amount of money. You want to do a ton of queries, we're going to charge you a ton amount of money, right? And what we basically found is that it's not necessarily married. The amount of value that a customer is going to get from GreyNoise is not necessarily married to the volume of queries that they're using. We talked to enough smaller organizations that just were more technical and had more advanced stacks that were like, look, this is valuable to us, but we're going to have to do like, 100,000 queries to do this. We wanted to have a pricing model that actually right-sized so that we were charging people correctly, and that we weren't kind of like nickel and diming people and making them ration their queries to get what they wanted to get, right? We had a lot of conversations with our customers where they would say like, hey, I would use GreyNoise in these other places, but I don't want to go over my limits. And like, that's not what we want. We want you to get as much value from GreyNoise as humanly possible all the time. So basically we've shifted to a model that's basically, we have a standard package. This is public on our website. We have effectively like our Investigate package is a flat rate, $25K a year. And then if you want to actually automate basically everything against GreyNoise, and you want your whole organization and all of the different security products that you have to be able to be hooked up into GreyNoise, it's going to be a rate based on the size of your organization, and you can run as many queries as you want. So that's the way that we're doing pricing now. If you want to hear more about any of that stuff, reach out to any of our salespeople, and we'll get you hooked up with all the info that you want on that.
Beautiful.
Awesome. That was the end of my shilling, I promise.
I think that's fair. And considering it was prompted, not unprompted. So I think we have a question. This
either that or it was Brandon. He planted the question.
Definitely.
It was. I thought there was something going on in this person who has a picture of Brandon, but with a fake mustache.
The mustache.
Yeah.
I think we have a question that's going back a little bit to the RIOT data. So how about open DNS recursive resolvers?
Yeah,
there's more context to this, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we actually do already have OpenDNS's primary DNS servers, but I don't know that we have some of the other outside of the primary DNS servers. I don't know that we have any of those in there, because I know for OpenDNS, I think we only have like 2 or 3 IPs for that, and it's just the ones that everybody knows. If there are more servers outside of that, Nate, we can look into that.
Yeah. So one of the things is the change to RIOT trust levels came somewhere in the middle of the beta, where we were really figuring out like what is trustworthy and what is not, and that's why we introduced the trust levels. For example, the high level, open DNS servers are very trustworthy, right? Like, we know who's attributable for them. However, like this whole list of like open DNS servers, it's kind of like a little bit less so, right? So with the advent of trust level 2, and the full release of RIOT, that's something that we can definitely look to add more. And that's similar to kind of like the Ubuntu update servers as well, right? There's a couple that are very, very well known, very well used, and then anyone can kind of host a mirror. Although there are things in place to make sure that those aren't bad, we don't want those to be kind of erroneously in the list if they're used out of band for something else as well, and they're using that to build up credibility in a way to kind of like hurt your organization through like an open source kind of way. That's really what trust level 2 is kind of there, and we're looking to expand out exactly into that domain. Remy, do you have something to add?
Remy, you're muted. Don't worry, guys. In the meantime, I'm going to sing you a song.
Test.
Yeah. You got to bring up the volume a little bit.
Test.
There you go. That's good.
Perfect.
All right. So open resolvers on the internet, a lot of that depends on the context in which that traffic's seen, because we can enrich data for an IP, but it really depends on how that net flow data is represented within your organization, outbound or inbound, because open DNS resolvers can be abused for DDoS attacks. And we want to avoid getting into attribution of what it is, but that's certainly something that we can enrich in terms of providing that information and context so that we can aid in investigations.
Thanks, Remy.
Awesome.
What else do we have, Supriya?
I'm going back to Greg. Greg, your question, did we answer it correctly? I know that there was some confusion between OpenDNS and open resolvers. Okay, great. And yes, to answer, there's been a few questions about sharing this. Yes, we will be posting this. It'll be part of the community resources page hosted on our documentation. And I'll also be sharing the slides as well so that you can share them with your respective teams. Fantastic. Nate.
Yeah, so there's a little bit discussion here. Can we talk a little bit about Paul's question about DNS? So Paul's question was, have you thought about doing anything with DNS? The shared hosting providers sometimes have thousands of domains sharing IP. It'd be great if you could do something more atomic. And then Jerry Perullo followed up with, I think Paul's question might translate into saying 200 plus PDNS entries pointing to this IP. So let's call it a shared hosting IP or some tag like that. I think I know that's the logic we see at IR today in investigation IPs. Seeing 200 plus in PDNS immediately leads to some conclusions. Yes, so this is actually like a really big issue. And this is kind of part of what RIOT seeks to do with CDNs, right? Like largely, if you are seeing like a vast number of DNS associated with an IP, it's probably a CDN, and it's kind of one of the things that there's not much you can do about that at that time, right? It really borks an investigation, and for a junior analyst, it's actually something where they're like, oh wow, I found all these malicious domains hooked to one IP, and it's really a shared hosting provider. So from that perspective, we aim to resolve that kind of problem, and this problem. I'll give a really more concrete example. It's really obvious when you put it into Maltego and you do like a DNS enrichment on IP and you get like enough nodes to crash your desktop. And that's just really unfortunate. And that feels really, really bad. So the nice thing would be is if it checked RIOT first and was like, actually, this is just a CDN, right? Now that's certainly possible for something like Cloudflare or other major CDNs that we have tabs on, but it's actually a very difficult problem with kind of these more low-key shared hosting providers. But we're looking to add those. And if you have particular ones that you have in mind, we're happy to look into them and try and add those. I hope that kind of addresses that a little more thoroughly. Yes, Maltego explodes. This is a problem with any graph visualization tool that uses DNS enrichment on an IP, and also anything that does any kind of graph enrichment. It's a very unfortunate problem caused by CDNs.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. And I see no more questions in Q&A. Again, like I said, we're more than happy to stick around. We've got another 10 minutes kind of earmarked on everyone's schedule, but I'm happy to end the recording as is. And yeah, we can stay on.
I'm happy as a clam. If we had a chance to spread the good word of RIOT, answer a couple questions, then I'm more than happy to break it out and let everybody go. I just really appreciate everyone taking the time to come here and meet with us. We'll be doing this again next quarter. So in Q1, we'll be doing it and we'll be talking about some more stuff that we built and that we're working on. But look, this is, from my perspective, the way that I think about our users and our community is remarkably similar to the way an artist thinks about their audience, or the way that someone thinks about their kind of like patrons of what they do. Without people to listen to your music, then nobody's going to be a great, fantastic artist. And without our users, like, we're not going to have a product that's fantastic. And so we need you guys is what I'm getting at. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to come here and meet with us. And Supriya, thank you for getting all this stuff together and for getting everyone here. I really appreciate it a lot. Thanks everyone so much for the time.
We'll be continuing the chat party in the community Slack. So we'll see you there.
GreyNoise everything. All right, see you guys.
Thanks, everybody.